Welcome to just another solar podcast with Luke Beattie. That's me, and Karl Jensen. G'day,
That's
mate.
me.
How's it going there, Karl?
Good, mate. Good to hear from you again on Friday.
It's been a bit of a challenge over here in WA. I don't think it affects the whole country. Back on the 21st of January, there was a flood in South Australia and it's wiped out a bunch of the rail line, and it's affecting any rail that's going into Northern Territory, WA, or the other direction. So for a company with a head office in WA, that's affected us a lot. Karl, you'd be feeling it too.
Definitely very difficult to get stuff, particularly to Darwin. So they're talking 30% increase in costs if you want to get stuff moved there. And Darwin's already about $400 or $500 for, so something like a Powerwall to get from Melbourne to Darwin, $400 or $500, add another 30% in 2 weeks.
But, I mean, there's normally about one derailment a year, and we've seen this since I've been moving freight across the country, but this is the longest disruption. So a bit painful, but I think we'll jump in with our special guest today, which is Matt Wright from Pure Electric. G'day, Matt. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm just trying to wind down now after a pretty difficult, lots going on kind of day.
Yeah, sure. So just to give a brief background on how you got into solar and your journey into it, do you want to just give us an idea?
Yeah, I'll try and be as brief as possible because I've done a thing or two with solar. But I remember I was a bit of an unusual person. When I was 19, I bought a house. Then when I bought a house, I thought a house has got to have solar on it. So $24,000 later, I had a PSA 5 kilowatt and 10 BP 165s. I think those panels were probably in today's money worth about $3,000 or $4,000 each. So back then, everyone thought this panel's got to be at like the latitude. It's got to be at 37 degrees. You know, you've got to get every watt out of this panel for the year. And that was the thinking, the prevailing thought at the time. And that's actually the thinking that seems to have informed a lot of the current rules around solar installations and the thinking around solar installations today, which is a totally different scene than then, because you don't pay $24,000 for 1.65 kilowatts today.
Yeah.
In recent times, you've been able to get $1 a watt or something to do 24 kilowatts for that price.
PSA, sorry, Matt, just to interrupt, those who aren't as old as us don't know what that is. That's a Selectronic off-grid inverter, and it's still running, isn't it?
So Butler and Brown had a business making transmitters for radio stations, including 3CR and Triple R and so on. And Butler and Brown made these radio transmitters, and a radio transmitter apparently was pretty similar to a solar inverter. So then they created a solar inverter company, and their solar inverter just happened to be the best because they were geniuses. And they weren't very good at business, though, as far as I can tell. So their business was really floundering, even though they'd actually developed the world's best microgrid inverter. And Selectronic company that had its own off-grid inverters scooped them up. And then the evolution of the product today is there's only really two. Guys maybe have your own view, but I think there's only two really excellent options for off-grid inverters today, and that's probably the Victrons series and the Selectronics, and I'm squarely in the Selectronic Australian camp myself.
So how did you move from being a solar consumer into the industry and then doing the things that you do?
Well, I got the solar, and then I ran into this anti-wind power campaign. We're talking about big wind, and I couldn't stand what I was hearing because straight away I always had sort of basic electronics, soldered things since I was a child and stuff like that, and
those old Dick Smith kits?
Yeah, the Dick Smith. Was it my kit too or something? But I had the hand-me-down one that my brothers had all wrecked. So moving along, I sort of straight away they were saying stuff about wind power that just wasn't true, and I couldn't stand it. So I pretty uppity and started running a campaign supporting wind power. A lot of them would say, "Oh no, we're okay with solar, but we're not okay with wind." But actually, the reality was they didn't care about solar; they just hated wind. And I was like, okay, well, you're like 40, 50 years old. You have some yuppie beach house and you're anti a wind farm coming nearby, but you don't have solar, even though you keep saying you're okay with solar. And I do have it, and I'm only like 20. So it was kind of a good sort of point to sort of roll them on their bullshit that they were.
So you did that campaign, and then how did you get a career, or where did you go from there?
So from there, it was like eventually it became, well, you were justifying wind, and then they were saying, renewable sources could only do 5% of a modern grid, that you couldn't go, or the lights would go out. And so in the end, I got involved deeper and deeper in these arguments and these public spats, and I had to back it up. So next thing you know, I set up a research organisation and recruited heaps of like uni dudes and various people. People worked in companies from all sorts of walks of life who had various expertise, and we started to put together plans to show that you could actually run a modern grid eventually on 100% renewable. And we were like fully painted as extremists and crazies, and I've been called everything. Funnily, today, that stuff's a lot more mainstream than it was back.
You mean that more people in the mainstream reckon you're crazy?
No, no, more people are just basically accepting we're going 100% renewables. Whereas back then, they were like, 100% renewables, you're nuts, you're crazy. Fossil fuels is the only way to do it.
Over the years, Matt, you've grown that little system on your house in Brunswick. What do you got on the roof now?
Well, I've now got 93 panels, sun power.
Beg your pardon?
93 sun power panels. like I wanted 100. I started out with that plan, but there just wasn't enough sort of space on my property. Went with what I had available. It's an inner city house, so 93 is kind of the limit. The third upgrade of it, which was back in like 2013 or 12 or something, that's running at the moment. But my new Mega 70 panel upgrade is currently all installed but idle.
Okay, so what's the challenge there? Getting approval? What's the hold up?
I've been trying to get 3-phase onto the house, and that would then allow me to apply and presumably get 10 kilowatts per phase, which is what people get around this area for feed-in. But my electricity distribution company has been hopeless along the way. They've been negligent in things they've done.
Do you think they're trying to block it, or they're just not able to interpret the information correctly or come to a resolution?
Yeah, look, there's been a bit of that, not being able to interpret it, but also I've had dealings with certain people there, and they have thought that the distribution company gets to make up its own rules outside of the service installation rules, which are fairly black and white. They say what you can and can't have. Yeah, so now I'm in a process of disputes, and the ombudsman's involved. And
so just jumping across, within your business, Pure Electric, you also have a big focus on big solar for people.
Yeah.
And do you find these sort of roadblocks along the way, or are there parts of the country where you can just operate and install these easily?
Look, I think with really big solar, we've generally, I think I already made the call early that you don't try and work with a customer to upgrade them from single phase to 3-phase once they're already sort of a legacy setup. They've already got a supply, because the power companies are just too painful to deal with. So they've got customers who are like single phase, and they got a common one would be just like a 13.3 or a 15 kilowatt system or something, up to, at the bigger end, 20 kilowatts on their single phase. And then from there, the customers who've got like 49 sun power or something, or whatever, the 24 kilowatt ones, and that they're already 3-phase customers. So yeah, so for myself, I've got an electric car. I wanted to get much bigger solar. We're now talking like, in excess of 35 kilowatts. So that's just too big to be viable on a single phase connection with a 5 kilowatt export limit. Like I said, that you're really maxing with a battery. You're maxing out at about 20 kilowatts on a single phase, in my view. So I really have to go 3-phase if I want to go bigger. So people always ask me why. Simply, I just want to bump coal and gas off the grid, fossil fuels off the grid, and I'm hoping I can get an okay payback doing that. I don't need a 3-year payback. I don't need a 7-year payback. If it takes 8 years or 9 years, I'm cool. And when you do go for a really big like this, and a project like this, and you start having higgledy-piggledy panels everywhere, then the price is not going to be as good as a nice, big, expansive system facing north or west, or 2 different faces where you can continuously lay down 20 panels or 40 panels in the burbs. That's not the setup at my house.
How do you find the customer base at that, Matt? Do they think that you're a nutty professor? Do they think that you're an Elon Musk that's come to their door? How do you find the feedback from those customers?
Obviously, yeah, when I'm chatting to them, a lot of them probably have heard of me or have got the sort of idea. We're Pure Electric, so we're about getting off gas, getting off fossil fuels. Houses are addicted to gas. And then maximising solar generation, minimising energy demand on site, and trying to create a near zero or zero grid input home. I'm totally against the idea that some people have got, which is like, I'm going to disconnect from the grid and run away and be a hermit. Like, if the grid's there and you can export power that covers your grid connection fee, then you really got to keep that grid. In fact, it's kind of crazy to be dropping it, because you're now those electrons are going to travel out the wire from your property and into your neighbour's house, and you're going to be able to power them. If you've managed to convince your neighbour to go solar, or they already were smart enough to do it themselves, then it's going to go to the next neighbour. Or if everyone's doing it together, it's going to start backfeeding on the zone substation, go up a level, and then help some other neighbourhood or some high-rise apartments where they can't go big solar. there's always value in setting power back, and we should be properly compensated for that.
Matt, several years ago, we got in touch and we were talking about putting multiple panels and oversizing solar systems. And whilst it wasn't new, you've taken it to the next level and actually done proper research on systems where you've got 200, 250, even 300% oversizing on the inverter. What sort of insight can you give us around that?
Yeah, with these bigger systems, we found that when you've got south panels, east, I call them news systems, so north, east, west, south. So the news systems, they basically, each aspect can present power skewed towards different times of the day, and that kind of helps with having less clipping. So you start to get a real tabletop of production. So a system can wake up in the morning and then just go 10 kilowatts, 10 kilowatts, 10 kilowatts, 10 kilowatts, 10 kilowatts until the end of the day, and can do that a lot of the time. Or under clouds where you might be getting 10% out of a system, well, this one's now giving you 30%, which is a lot more interesting to the grid.
So interestingly, we've talked about this before. You've done the studies. In winter, we're under an overcast sky. Does it matter which way the panels face?
No. So diffuse light is best on a horizontal plane. So, and what happens when you got panels south and panels north, for example, if they're sort of the same pitch and there's no other obstructions involved or whatever, you're actually getting the same. It's all dynamic. The light's dancing off clouds. It's called cloud edge effects. You've got all this dynamic stuff happening. And on average, at any given moment, the south panels might be doing better than the north panels, or the north panels might be doing better than the south panels. But on average, you'll get the same output from all of your panels on different aspects if they're the same relative pitches. So people don't realise that. And the other thing about somewhere like Melbourne, and the stats are similar in most places, like in winter, you're talking 50% contribution under clouds. So clouds really becomes a design point for your system.
So what you're saying there is, in order to be able to get off gas and supply enough energy to feed someone's home and heat their water and cook their food for winter performance when, say, Melbourne is overcast for a lot of the time, really doesn't matter which way you face the panels. And because they've got an STC rebate attached to them, it just doesn't matter. The answer is still in the news.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
You spoke about plateau production there, Matt. So how does that feed into export limits? In a lot of the territories, they'll give a hard export limit of 5 kilowatts. In WA, for over 5 kilowatt systems now, we've got a 1.5 kilowatt export limit. What's your opinion on export limiting and going for larger systems, and what benefit does it have to the grid?
Yeah, look, it's a bit of a complicated subject, and I've got various levels of my view. One's a really forward-looking into the future of much more solar everywhere kind of view. But straight away, it's actually like a really good thing to have a 10 kilowatt system, for instance, that's export limit at 5. Now, instead of having your peak where you tabletop a little bit just around 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock or something, you're now doubling the amount of time that you're presenting a block of power as a generator, which then when many households do that at the same time, or factories or whatever it is, then suddenly, solar's a much more important, bigger generator, because it's not like just coming in and then going out, petering off. We're now presenting that block. So if you take it further and you go 300% oversizing, like just talking about with Karl, well, then your block becomes even bigger. There's still a bit of evolution in the industry to go here, because like in the future, I think that if you're going to put 10 kilowatts on, then probably you should only get a 5 kilowatt export limit. But if you're going to put 20 kilowatts on, and then your export limit on single phase should be 10 kilowatts, which is what the standard is in United Energy's area.
So the argument back from the distributors is that the network infrastructure and whether it can cope or not, and it's overstressing it and that sort of thing. So what would you say to that?
Oh, in most cases, it's a big lie. If you look at, say, City Power, for example, with its 5 kilowatt export limit versus United Energy, well, City Power is in a very dense area where people can't really get big systems on their roof. I mean, I don't actually know how I did it. It's just, I guess, where there's a will, there's a way. But your average house in Brunswick can't get 90 panels up, right? If you look at it, it's the middle burbs and stuff that have actually got all the solar panels. And yet United Energy is the middle burbs, and they're coping with 10 kilowatt export limit. But City Power will be the first to be out there lobbying. In fact, they are the leading lobbyists against solar, trying to get export limits down and make claims that the grid's being overrun. But yet City Power doesn't have the high penetration of solar because you just physically can't get that much on the roofs. And the roofs are often really steep, so they're not like the favourite of solar companies to try and target, with those sort of pitches at 30 to 45 degrees. They're not where people are targeting. They're targeting in the middle berths. So I think just clearly that United Energy's on 10 kilowatt export limit and surviving, and City Power's on 5, just shows that the people in the City Power distribution area are getting a really rough deal, because they're so the same network. I mean, they got sort of artificially divvied up during the Kennett years when they were sold off. And along the perimeter of City Power and United and City Power and Gemini, there are even streets that share the same transformer. The transformer might be owned by United or owned by City Power, but the United customers are actually hooked into that, and they're allowed to have a 10 kilowatt export limit on the same transformer that the City Power customers are only allowed to have 5 kilowatts, just because you're on the opposite side of the street. And that's just terrible discrimination. So
doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, I'm hoping to get some traction. So I installed a system for a Greens state member of Parliament in Victoria, and he's gone like me. He's gone the whole hog solar roof Tesla Powerwall, and now he's got the 5 kilowatt export limit. And I said, if his house was transplanted, if we put his house on a truck, can we drove it 12 kilometres to the east and we deposited it in Doncaster at the edge of United, then he'd suddenly be able to, out of his 14 kilowatt system, he'd be able to export 10 kilowatts. I mean, my background is I told you I was reacting to all that anti-solar, anti-wind, can't get much 5% on the grid. So I created an organisation called Beyond Zero Emissions, and Beyond Zero Emissions became pretty big, and we actually had a research partnership with Melbourne University, and we created like the first plan ever to run Australia on 100% renewable energy using a diverse mix of renewables and so on. And that was kind of like the line in the sand. I think from that day on, that's when more and more people started to accept that you can go 100% renewable. So that was exciting stuff.
When do you think we can achieve it by, realistically?
Look, it was a stretch target. We started in 2007 saying this. We published our book in 2010. So it was like a 10-year plan was the idea. Because we thought for starters, you've got to have a plan. You've got to be thinking that we're going to do this, not just sort of some let the market decide kind of thing, because it never actually did decide. Politicians decide by throwing subsidies at coal plants or subsidies at wind or whatever they want to do at the time. So we did make the decision. But the funny thing is renewables has kept somehow moving along. And that's the funny thing about renewables. I think at the beginning that there was subsidies for solar, and it was like, tut, here, we'll do this just to humour the greenies or to humour with the solar. But they kind of like, the take-up was much higher than anyone expected. And so they had to keep sort of like, it was like swat and ball, like try and stop the subsidy. Oh, hang on, that 60-cent feed-in tariff, that wasn't supposed to be taken up by 100,000 people. That was meant to be taken up by, 1,000 people.
So come on, knock it on the head.
Yeah, so they knock it on the head, and they try to knock it on the head, and then they went with some other program, but the panel prices just kept going down. So the lesser program, suddenly it caused the next boom. And so we kept having boom. So I think it was like a huge accident that we got the renewables we got. But in terms of like the timeline, 2020 was like, if you wanted to get serious about this, but that would have been like, as serious as we want to build nuclear submarines kind of serious, or buy joint straight fighters or something. I think 2030, there were people who came in like afterwards and said, oh, you're ridiculous, 2020, 2030. But I didn't want to shift the thing and say, oh, yeah, no, we're a bit too ambitious. We should slow down and promote something slower. That's a bad idea, because people always go slower than what people are at the edge promote. And I was definitely at the edge. Okay, I was like the extremist saying
so
let's go 100% renewable.
In terms of your business, Matt, that's been very, very successful for you, though, promoting to customers that at the time, 1.5 kilowatts, this really isn't big enough. You need to be looking at 4 and 5 kilowatts. When 5 kilowatts were the thing, all of a sudden we've got 6.6 kilowatt systems as being the main driver. And here's you installing 20 kilowatt systems and up on people's houses. That's been very successful for you, yeah?
Yeah. Look, it's much more interesting for me. I mean, there's a certain sort of trade at selling solar that people have, and they're good at stamping out 6.6 kilowatt systems, or, just it was like in the early days, it was like 8 panels, which you could just about fit on any roof. So they kind of put 8 panels facing north or something, or 6 panels facing north. And then it sort of became a little bit of a design job, because the system's got up to 20 panels. So they had to like actually get a measurement of the house to try and make them fit. I'm kind of like, the guy's been in and out of uni doing renewable energy research and all this sort of stuff, so I need something a bit more challenging. So I guess I find the customers who want to try and put panels on their east side, their west side, and their north side, and then eventually their south side. And
so back then, the low-hanging fruit was the 1.5 and 2 kilowatt systems, and they were generous feed-in tariffs.
Yeah.
But now you could argue that the low-hanging fruit is a 6.6 kilowatt system on a 5 kilowatt inverter, easy approval, fits on lots of roofs, and pretty low-hanging fruit just to be a cookie solution.
It's a cookie cutter solution. The sad thing about it is that probably some percentage of the people who are buying the 6.6, they could have actually happily parted with the money for a bigger system. So that lack of education in the industry and someone just choosing the no resistance, easy effort 6.6 is almost like a technology blocker for that person having a bigger system. Because once they've gone and made the effort, they've installed their 6.6 system, they don't want to go back now and add another 4 kilowatts of panels or whatever. It's all too hard. And because that particular segment of the company, the businesses were just geared towards stamping 6.6 systems, every time they manage to stamp one of those on someone who's open to something else, well, they've done a bit of a discredit to the movement to get the country off fossil fuels. Generally, the view is the Wright system is pretty much to fill your roof within your budget. I mean, look, think about what's coming. Battery storage is coming. If you're not affording it now, it's going to go the same way as solar. It's going to come down in price eventually. You're going to have one electric car. And guess how many you're going to have after that? You're going to have like 2. I think the average amount of cars in Australia is like greater than 2 per house or something. So, you could have 3. Yeah. So there's a lot of use for electricity. And you've got that thing that in many parts of the country, the kind of ratio you're talking winter to summer is like 2.5 times the power in summer versus winter. So then if winter's your design point, then a 6.6 kilowatt system is a 2 kilowatt system. I mean, everyone does imagine solar and sun because they all start buying when October, November rolls around, and they don't buy in like March or April or May or June. And that's because they think sun. Well, you've got to think sun in June. Well, then you need like 3 times as big a system.
In doing those bigger systems, you're also doing other things with their gas usage. You mentioned getting off gas. Why are people in Victoria, well, probably right across Australia, why are we still building houses with connections to a gas grid?
Well, in some areas, it's regulated that they must connect to the gas grid. So that's been the case in South Australia, where they've opened a new development and the government's mandated a hookup to the gas network. In Victoria, it's been done by stealth, by saying that every house needs a gas-boosted solar hot water service if there's reticulated gas available in the street. And so developers usually put the gas down and what flows on is all these gas-boosted hot water services. And once you've got the gas foot in the door, then it's easier to be a gas-ducted system and so on. That's really bad news. So that needs to come out of the building code and the plans. ACT's made a bit of a move now. Their regulations gone the opposite way. They've now said, no, there's going to be no gas on new developments. So ACT is the first mover in strictly saying no gas. That's good. But Victoria and South Australia, which are pretty much the heartland of gas, are still mandating.
There was a study done recently that said that cooking with gas on your kitchen stove is actually the same for people in your household as living with a smoker. Matt, how does someone even come up with that sort of numbers? You've spent a lot of time at university. That one blew me away.
Look, I didn't have the exact number, but I'd actually written articles on this over 10 years ago, and I've repeated it, that danger of the products of the combustion of the fuel in your house is really detrimental to health. I mean, to do the study, I guess they've basically looked at areas that have gas cooking and areas that don't, and they've looked at all the demographic data between them and seen that there's consistencies in populations. There's areas within countries that have all electric cooking, and then another area in the same country not far away might have all gas cooking, so they can see that. They've obviously seen the health difference, and it's noticeable. Could you imagine if in the last 10, 15 years ago, we introduced gas cooktops with their naked flames and able to burn pinky fingers of little kids? Like, nah, a gas cooktop would never be allowed. Like, it's so risky. And
so it's like introducing cigarettes now. I mean,
it's
been something that's been with us for a long time, but if you tried to introduce that as a drug now, you'd have no chance of getting it approved.
That's right. Cigarettes, plus it's got that burns risk as well. So cigarettes plus something really dangerous. Can burn children. I mean, you're not even allowed to distribute hot water at greater than 50 degrees, but the stove, which the little 4-year-old can climb up on the stool in the kitchen and reach over into the flame, that's okay. But the bathroom tap can only do 50 degrees hot water. And the other thing is that 50% of house fires or something start in the
kitchen.
And it'd be interesting to see how many of those house fires start in the kitchens of the houses that have gas versus the houses that have electric cooking.
I was thinking next part of that is, of course, we see sadly, every year, a couple of people die. There's no fire. They just put themselves to sleep because the ducted gas heating system's leaking carbon monoxide and everybody dies. So there was a bit of a push there for carbon monoxide detectors in rental properties. If we didn't have gas-fired heating, we wouldn't have gas-fired heating deaths.
And you don't have any carbon monoxide meters because you don't really have much of a carbon monoxide problem.
Your recommendations to your customers, sure, there's the solar. It's also bringing hot water cooktops. Are you looking to bring people completely off gas? And how do you?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you approach that with your customers then?
Well, we're not supplying them, but we do give some recommendations. Like if you need to go cheap Chinese, well then Electrolux at a cheaper end or 5-year warranty, the IKEA one. And then if you want to go a bit better quality, they start with Bosch at about $1,500. And then like I've got Miele, but I'm kind of lucky because I buy like Miele that are 10 years old and the capacitor's gone and I swap it. So I get myself an induction cooktop for $50, but the average punter's probably going to have to pay $2,000 for their Miele induction cooktop. Yeah, a lot of scope to fix things, but Australia just has a structure in the economy that doesn't really promote that. So
yeah, culturally, we're a throwaway society. Exactly. I mean, even if it's capable of being fixed, people just dispose of it and buy the new one.
Well, in my view, we should go better quality and try and fix things. But we go better quality, we don't even fix the better quality things. But the better quality things, like most things, they usually have serial faults.
What is a serial fault? You mean it's repeated over and over
and over again. So a particular product A, might have 5 faults, but 3 of them happen. They're like always happening. So if somebody set something up to target those, or if the manufacturer was made to target those, and they could actually pretty cheaply fix those 3 faults. But they sort of just want to move on to the next generation, or they just hoping the customers are buying new products. So there's no interest in to fix those serial faults. Whereas the manufacturer should actually support identifying the main fault. So, maybe if something happens more than 10 times, the manufacturer should be forced to identify why that particular error mode happened and provide the fix.
If they could even do that, then you'd think that it would improve their warranty claims. If someone could fix their own thing and it was out there in the public domain, then perhaps you could even fix things that wouldn't cost the manufacturers as much money.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if there are enough people in the field, you might not have to dispatch your people with travel and things like that. With their expertise, you might be able to say, we'll pay for the local repair dude to do the documented repair. But anyway, I think it'll take a while to create this because you need to have a whole, like an education system to create those people. Because at the moment, they're just mostly like electronics nuts and enthusiasts and stuff. The real crazy good ones of that sort of stuff, they're few and far between.
What we really need is a resources crunch. And at the moment, we're seeing it. So resources, don't know if anyone's paying attention to the price of lithium salts, but lithium was $10,000 a ton a year ago. And today it's $60,000 a ton.
Well, we're seeing it a little bit in cars because a car now might be worth, like my Tesla was like 75,000, but now it's possibly worth 85,000. And even the rest of the secondhand car market, people are probably going, I've done the engine, I'll actually spend the $2,000 and repair the engine, even though it's a 14-year-old car. Whereas before they would have just scrapped it and just got the next car. So that's probably a little bit of a price signal happening at the moment. But I think it means more than just that sort of price signal. It's something proactive, like to actually get people and say this is an honourable thing to do. It's a cool pursuit as a life career.
Well, what about EVs then? Are we going to see the same disposable culture? I wouldn't think so because, like you said, they're not cheap. They are going to scale down in price, but also if it's a known fault, is it all going to be on the manufacturers to sort that, or is there going to be a whole industry of aftermarket mechanics or technicians or something that are going to be popping up and servicing all the EVs?
Well, right to repair laws should allow for that. The manufacturer certainly should offer it, if possible, at a reasonable price as well.
I'm not aware of these right to repair laws.
They're in the US. It's quite a movement. So it's around those small repair shops fixing like Apple phones and Samsungs and things like that. It's actually got ground in a lot of places in the US where Apple's been forced to sell like their proprietary equipment for removing screens, or that they had systems where if you wanted to replace the screen, it would actually brick the phone. And now they're not allowed to do that. They've basically got to give access to their hardware or not restrict them in that way so that the third-party shops can do the repairs.
Yeah, so I put a new water pump on my car and the tail shaft fails. The dealer can't turn around and say, well, the part that you fitted stuffed this. So it still has an obligation to
But they'd like to make you think that that's the case so that you go to them for everything.
Yeah, so right down to the oil change. So unless I change the oil for you, the tail shaft's not covered under warranty.
Yeah, and that's not legal in Australia. But a lot of
And
people would believe that myth, which is what those big monopolies, they want to promulgate that myth because they want to have all your business for themselves.
Before we finish up, I know that you're a SunPower fanboy.
Yeah.
We've had the big announcement in the last couple of weeks that SunPower Maxium panels have gone to 40 years warranty. And there's a fair bit of detail around that it accounts for the cost of replacement. And
look, I kind of thought 25-year warranties were a bit long as it was. I think SunPower was one of the first to come out with a 25-year warranty, and then a bunch of manufacturers sort of matched them or matched them. Now, SunPower does sort of some grounds for coming out with these really long warranties. I mean, they got something like a 1 in 10,000 return rate on their panels. If you go to the page on SunPower about their warranty registration, under the new 40-year warranty, they point out that you're 100 times less likely to get your SunPower panel replaced than the industry average. I certainly haven't seen any failed SunPower panels, and I've got optimizers on a lot of them. I've got monitoring on ones going back to like 2010 with string inverters, and they don't seem to have suffered the kind of degradation which would show any sort of serious number of bypass diode failures or anything like that. So, yeah, like they're pretty good. But SunPower did write a document which a long time ago, which said that the accelerated testing they've done and showed 40-year life for these panels. So it does relate to something that they didn't just come out with as a harebrained idea right now. So I think they're relating it to that. The only thing is, in 40 years, if you're the person who's buying SunPower panels, which means you're into buying the best and it's the most efficient, you're probably going to want to put the 35% efficient multi-layer panel on your roof in 15 or 20 years' time. So, that SunPower panel's now not going to be with the original owner, which I think is where the warranty goes. It's going to be on a barn, on a farmhouse where it was easy to redeploy. Yeah, so it's sort of meaningless in some respects. But I did have a client today. He wanted me to assure him that if he went ahead, he's going to get the 40-year warranty version of the SunPower panels. So I've been talking to him before Christmas about buying, and he's just ready to go now. So it's something that people are buying into.
You can see with the IBC technology cells, they do have some grounds to say, hey, it's going to last longer than the average. I just wonder if we're going to see some of the other panel manufacturers coming out trying to match it. We've moved the line to 40 years.
But I don't think you can be too concerned as an owner about the 40-year warranty. Like the 25-year warranty is bad enough. If you've got someone, I mean, for starters, like what percentage of houses have actually turned over in the 40 years, right? So
most of them.
They're asking you to register it with the owner. You've got to give one serial number, and you've got to say this is the owner, register the house. And then there's the case of if you are that leading edge person, you're going to swap them at year 15 anyway, because you want to get the latest 30% efficient panels. You're going to turn your 10 kilowatt system into a 15 kilowatt system. If that's your finite roof, you've run out of east, west, and south now. But you want a bigger system because now you're
struggling to charge my EV.
You got your two EVs, and you realised that it is a pain to charge them in the middle of winter, and that's when I want to run the heater flat out and stuff like that. But I want to do that off my roof. I'm not happy with my 80% solar life. I want my 100% solar life. So if you were out there buying SunPower before, then you're probably going to swap that. But moving down a tier, to the cheaper ones, well, they're just saying me too, me too, me too. And they're just leaving a liability for the poor installer at year 12.
Look, it's a good one. I really think that most, if not all, the manufacturers in the Australian market today are using very similar materials. When I say very similar, I mean the lessons of the past of 8 years ago where we had lots of Q cells fail, lots of trainers fail. There's not many of those panels that are left now. That, from my perspective, it comes down to the back sheet. So glass isn't going to disappear. It's going to last 100 years. The cells, the degradation that we're seeing, 0.3, 0.4% per annum, basically means that the panel's going to last a hell of a long time if it doesn't end up with water in it. That's the bane of crap modules. It hasn't been a crap
seal. The seal in the back sheet.
So you always had a little bit of leakage, and hence the standards around earth faults. And we saw that. We did a big system. Each one of the panels met the IEC standard for earth leakage, but it was on an Agillo, and an Agillo had 100 kilowatts at the time. That was 400 odd panels. And if you put 400 panels together and they all leaked a little bit, and all of a sudden you were running 600 volts and quite a lot of current, those earth faults added up to a point where the inverter wouldn't stay online. And the only solution that we had at the time was to take it up and break it into smaller pieces. But since then, I think the inverter standards changed, and you can adjust the amount of earth leakage depending on how many panels you've got connected to it. We haven't seen those sorts of problems in recent times. So I really do think that we've got some kind of a chance that the mainstream Chinese modules will do their 15 years without any problem. And modules that have got dual layer back sheets and 25-year warranties, they're going to last the 25 years. And SunPower is absolutely unique in being a back contact cell. Behind those cells is a full sheet of copper, and that's capable of wicking away heat caused by localized shading on the module. And it doesn't matter what you do to any other kind of cell technology, that copper backsheet just acts as a layer that can dissipate that heat elsewhere than localized, and hence you don't burn a hole in it. So I think the 40 years is probably reasonable, and how the market should deal with it. There needs to be a price premium there, and there is a price premium there. So for those people that can afford it, it's less panels going to landfill, and I applaud the move. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, but I'm not responding the same scared way as some installers are, because most of the faults are going to show up early in the piece anyway, within 10 years. If 10 years is sort of a standard for panel warranties, where you're probably going to see the faults in those sort of time periods. And it's not going to likely whack you hugely in 30 years' time, because A, you probably aren't going to be in business. B, you've sold your business. C, SunPower or Jinko are still around, so they actually honour it.
The house has like the fourth owner after the original person.
Yeah, and E, it actually doesn't fail, which is like Karl. I agree with Karl. There's there's every chance that 25 years is fine.
All right. Well, Matt, thanks for coming on today, man. It's been really good to hear some of your story and some of your thoughts.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Mate, thanks, Matt. I don't think our listeners really appreciate how much you've done for the industry in terms of lobbying network operators, lobbying government for greater export limits, and you've contributed an enormous amount to the industry without any thanks from anybody, and we appreciate it.
Okay, thanks. Well, thank you, guys.
Cheers. All right. Well, thanks for listening, guys. Click the subscribe button. Feel free to leave a review and flick it around to anyone who might get some benefit. Thanks a lot.